Today on The State of Us, Amazon, Alphabet, and others are quietly rolling out drone delivery across America and a new aircraft with no need for jet fuel. Welcome to The State of Us. I'm your host, Justin T. Weller, joined today by the one and only, the friendly redneck liberal and senior resident historian here at True Chat, Mr. Lance L. Jackson. I think we're going to see the friendly redneck liberal side today as we're talking about his very favorite subject, drones, particularly unmanned, autonomous, Terminator drones coming whirling about his house and property. That'll be really the dream for Mr. Lance Jackson. But we're going to look at today the companies rolling out drone delivery and the good and bad things about it, the hurdles that might still have to be overcome. And we're also going to talk about the new aircrafts that are being built that have no need for jet fuel because they're powered by batteries and what that might mean from a cargo and transportation standpoint, but also from a commuter standpoint, and how it could positively impact rural America. So we've got a lot to discuss, Lance, but before we dive in here, do we have a word of the day?
We do. Avocation. A-V-O-C-A-T-I-O-N. It's 4 syllables. It is a noun, and it is something one does in addition to their vocation or regular work, and usually for pleasure or a hobby. Avocation. And I am a child of the Jetsons, man. I am all about this drone thing. I think I'm having a change of heart if you've been a long time listener to the show. So listen up. I got some new insights here going on drones.
On drones.
Yep.
So
might be my new avocation.
My avocation could be
drones.
Aviation, right?
It is.
I mean, is that
that's one reason I chose
Okay.
it, because you are into flying. I don't like to fly, but if somebody can maybe fly something to me that makes the earth a better place and uses less gas and protects the roads and everything else, I might be for that. That might be enough positives there that would make my life easier, that I might put up with stuff flying through the air and getting delivered to me.
So I think it's worth noting that I think, Lance, that there's a possibility that if we...
You think there's a possibility that what?
that if we got you behind the controls of one of these flying cars, that then you might be all right.
Well, I grew up playing, video games with a joystick. So
if it works like that, maybe.
I'm good that way. If you're punching stuff into that computer keyboard or something, I don't know. But with a joystick, I'm pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Playing Pong on the black and white TV with a joystick is just like the epitome of fun. Yeah.
That's the most fun you could ever have right there.
Exactly.
So Lance alluded to, but I am a pilot, but I think it's important to note for the purposes of this show, I am not like the pilots in these articles that are commercial, like test pilots or have thousands of hours of flying experience. I am licensed to fly an aircraft, and am familiar with controlled airspace and that type of thing. So I can talk about it in that regard, but there's certainly people that know a heck of a lot more than I do.
You wouldn't fly an electric helicopter across a big old lake?
Oh yeah, I would. I mean, if somebody told me how to do that, I would do it.
All right.
But no, I am licensed to fly airplanes, so not helicopters. And that's kind of the interesting thing about when we talk about some of those, how they're we're really starting to bridge that gap between helicopters and airplanes, which is very interesting, but we'll save that. We'll start with drones, Lance, because after nearly a decade, according to the Wall Street Journal, after nearly a decade of unfilled hype about flying robots dropping orders at your doorstep, a handful of companies have actually started commercial operations in the United States involving dozens or hundreds of deliveries a day at each location. The companies are vying to be Americans' choice when they want a bottle of Advil, a takeout meal, or the next iPhone delivered in under 30 minutes. That is, once federal regulators enable broader rollouts.
Yeah, that's for later in the show. There's a real downer about this. I mean, I'm so upbeat about the use of drones, and we'll save the downer for at the end. Hint, though, right? Spoiler alert, it's the government.
So let's talk about some of the positives, right? Advocates for drone delivery talk about how this technology could reduce emissions, lower the cost per trip that is made for deliveries. It could also, and this to me, I think is a huge, this is why as a consumer, I mean, yes, great, I'm going to have it in 30 minutes or less. I mean, there are times, right, where that is important, but I think reducing the traffic on American roads, in my mind, that is one of the biggest selling points of this, because why, Lance? There's the obvious component of when you and me are out on the road, if there's less traffic on the road, that's nice. And also safer, by the way, when there's less traffic. So that's good. But what is the other reason that this is so important from a taxpayer standpoint?
Ohio's state tree, the orange pylon, is out in force right now. It is summer. And if you want to drive in Ohio, whatever road you're taking to go wherever you want to go probably has an orange cone or a detour on it, because it's nice to see all these big, huge semis rolling and knowing now that we're finally starting to get the supply chain moving and goods are going to be on the shelves that we can buy if we have the money for it, with the prices we're going to have to pay because gasoline is high. But those big rigs and everything else tear the roads up. They just do. There's so much traffic, and the heavier the vehicle is, the more damage it does to the roads. We're constantly having to pay to repair these roads so that we can use them, so that we can get from point A to point B. And so it costs us lots of money. I know all the way down to the township level, we have a tax levy to fix the roads in our township every summer, to keep them so that we can just drive into the little town of Urbana that is 5 miles from my home. I pay township taxes. Gas prices, most states have a built-in tax that goes towards road repair, because it's almost like a user fee. You're paying taxes on the gas that you put in your car, so that the state then has the money to repair those roads that you're driving your car on. So if the roads don't have to be repaired as much, hey, we could actually lower taxes.
You think about when something travels through the air, it's not wearing down the road, right? It's not congesting the road. Now, the next thing I think that comes to mind for a lot of people, right, that the drone thing is, sounds interesting, but a couple of items. Is it safe? And won't it be loud? Because I mean, sure, right now, Lance and I are not inundated with drones flying over our houses, but oh my gosh, if this rolls out widespread, we see these Amazon delivery vehicles all the time, right now, and you're going to need a heck of a lot more drones, because the drones don't haul the way a Amazon delivery truck does. So they're going to be just buzzing about all the time and a terrible nuisance, right? Well, that depends a lot on the drone and how it delivers the package. And that's what I want to talk about for a second, because honestly, this is an area where I guess in my mind, when I think about a drone delivering a package, the thing that has generally come to mind is like, well, the drone is going to probably land like in my front yard or driveway or something, or, almost land and set down this package. Or maybe it's going to get close and then like lower it on some kind of hook or something, and then fly away. So like it's going to have to get really close to, my property to deliver this package to me.
And there are ones that are built that way. Companies who are building drones who build them exactly like that. They have to get within a foot of the ground or whatever before the drone releases the package and drops it into its place. And so, yeah, there are drones that are made to do that, and some of them are loud. But we read about one that does it that way, and it makes no noise. And you're headed in a different direction. There are also drones being made that are going to deliver packages to us? How in the world can they deliver me something if they're not going to set it on the ground to me?
So there's a company called Zipline, and they operate an 11-foot wide fixed wing drone that launches from a steel rail by an electric motor that accelerates the 44-pound aircraft to 60 miles an hour in 1 second. Flying autonomously, the drones drop orders at their assigned addresses in cardboard boxes suspended beneath paper parachutes. Upon return to the launch station, they maneuver so that a centimeter-wide hook on their tails catches a line suspended at the end of a long carbon fiber arm, akin to the tailhook systems that halt Navy jets landing on aircraft carriers. The person in this city where they're testing these drones, the mayor, said that there is no noise level, none. That's the direct quote. But that's because these drones never get close really to the ground. They stay high enough up that you can't really hear them. And when drones are powered by electric motors, and this is true of pretty much everything that's powered by electric, they're just quieter because there is no internal combustion happening. So there's still a whirl, right? Because you're still propeller, air, all that kind of stuff. But the noise of the engine goes away, which is really the thing that makes the most noise. And I mean, Lance has listened to my electric car before. They're not that quiet because you have a big propeller, but they're quieter than like a plane or a gas-powered aircraft of some kind. And reminding that we're trading some noise for other, right? Because we're reducing some road traffic and freight traffic. So some of that noise is going away in exchange for noise that's not as loud. So no, you don't get rid of noise, but it also depends a lot on, as drones are developed, right, which type our company is going to choose.
And it's not spewing emissions into the air, ruining the ozone layer, nor is it destroying the roads that we're paying taxes on to repair each summer.
And you probably get deliveries faster.
There you go. The triumvirate. All three right there.
More to talk about, though. So if drones sound pretty good, I mean, there are some trade-offs, then what are the obstacles? Because the other thing is we talked about, are they safe? Are they safe? So let's talk about that. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. If Lance wanted to, the friendly redneck liberal could go out there today. He could buy himself a drone and start flying it. And that is not an exaggeration. I'm sure that some of you listening probably have your own personal drones. Lance could, for less than $500 if you wanted, you could go pick up a drone. You could get your wife's smartphone, and you would be piloting the drone with no professional training, license, nothing. Now, that may frighten quite a lot of people. There's obviously a lot of privacy implications because a lot of the drones that are operated for personal use are used for like aerial photography. They have cameras, that kind of stuff on them, or aerial video. That's what a lot of people personally use them for. And there's a lot of business use for that. But the drones we've been talking about, right, primarily focus on delivery, cargo. That's their job is to get you a package, pretty much, to bring you a thing. That's kind of their niche. As far as other hurdles go, one is, well, what do you actually need? Because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about this. Lance buys a drone like that. I mean, does he really not have to get any training or anything? Well, the FAA gives us some guidance on that. Under Part 107, there are two distinctions of when you should get a drone license. The first one is you need a drone license when you use your drone for work or business, i.e. commercial use, right? So if you are making money in any way with that drone, you're supposed to be licensed. You do not need a drone license when you fly your drone strictly for fun as a hobby or recreational use. The other thing is that generally speaking, if you're flying it for personal use, there's still a number of laws that you have to comply with. Like it's not just, do whatever the heck you want. You must fly for hobby or recreation only. So there can be no side jobs or in-kind work allowed. You must register your UAV with the FAA. You must fly within visual line of sight. This is a big one. So when some drones, right, because of the way they're like, you could fly them and not necessarily, they have camera and your controller, you can fly it and you may not see your drone. Legally though, if you're flying it for personal use, have to be able to maintain your eyes have to maintain contact with that drone. So you cannot fly it further than you can see it or behind things where you can't see it. You have to follow all community-based safety guidelines. So there's a number of, sometimes local municipalities have developed things. You must fly a drone that is under 55 pounds. You must never fly near other aircraft, and you must fly in Class G or Gulf, as it would be referred to in aviation, Class Gulf airspace. If you need to fly in Class B, C, D, or E controlled airspace, you have to apply for an airspace authorization. So,
man, I'm moving into a new stage of retirement, and I thought I was just going to pick up a new avocation here and start flying drones, and then that's got too many rules. I'm just going to get my drone and fly it, and then what are they going to do?
Well, as they roll out, and this is the other thing, right? The FAA is talking about, well, if we add a lot more aircraft, right, to the air, we need a way to monitor and control them. So they're looking at rolling out an entirely autonomous aircraft control system for unmanned, drones that will then interface with air traffic control for.
Well, I would think, now explain this to me, because we live in the country, but within 5 miles, we have a small municipal airport. And you are, as your avocation, are a pilot, as we said. And there are times when you fly over my property, because sometimes it's in a landing pattern or a circling pattern for our local airport. Would I be allowed to fly my drone, or am I in if I'm flying it over my field, am I in violation because I would be within airspace of commercial, because we don't really have any commercial, right, pilots that come into our airport. It's all private pilots, and there's.
Yeah. So that's a good question. Because that is kind of what we're talking about here because obviously what we don't want is for somebody in a plane, whether it's a little plane like what I fly, or whether it's an airline, you don't want to collide with.
Well, I want to fly it up there and say hi to Justin. Justin says, "Hey, I'm flying over your property." I'm like, "Oh, well," and I take my drone up, and say hi to you in front of your airplane and get stuck in your propeller or whatever. I don't want to get in trouble for that. So, it's an interesting scenario, right? Or will the drones, and here's where, your friendly redneck liberal doesn't know, can drones actually fly high enough to get up into the airspace that planes that you fly would reach as you're either taking off or coming in to our local airport? Could I even get up in that airspace?
Yes, you could. Generally speaking, and this is where we talk about uncontrolled airspace, right? Which is like where we're here at the studio, what's above us for the next, generally speaking, it's like 1,200 feet. Okay. Well, 1,199 feet. Basically up to that point is uncontrolled airspace, right? So nobody is in charge of that. There's you can pretty much do whatever you want, right? And that varies because if you enter certain radiuses of airports at certain levels, it becomes controlled airspace, right?
So what if I lived in a big city? What if I lived in Columbus? Like I grew up in Columbus, and I'm in a subdivision. Where can I fly, or how high can I go?
Generally, the rule of thumb would be you would never want to take your drone higher than 400 feet off the ground. If you're going higher than that, there is a chance that you would be violating if you live close enough to an airport, you may not be able to fly a drone at all because your house might actually sit within once you get close enough to an airport, their controlled airspace actually extends from the ground up to a certain level. So it is possible, and that's why it's important that people check. It is possible that if you live very close to an airport, there is no height that you could technically fly a drone to, legally. But for most people, I think the general, and again, this is not legal advice. This is just me saying, based on my understanding of things, up to 400 feet, you're probably fine. I would not push any higher than that. And one of the reasons 400 feet is a good barometer is as a pilot, when there is no controlled airspace or when you're in unpopulated areas, the rule of thumb for us, how far to stay away from other stuff, right? Like how close can I fly to a thing? Well, you need to be at least 500 feet from anything that you could potentially cause damage to, right? 500 feet above or below, and generally 1,000 feet laterally, right? So like if you're going to go by a radio tower or something and you're going to fly next to it. So generally that's part of why I would say 400 feet, because a pilot should almost never be closer to the ground than 500 feet at any time, even in uncontrolled airspace, unless they're landing. And again, if they're landing, they're coming into an airport, so hopefully that answers your question. In your case, you'd be fine because we've got a little municipal airport. There is controlled airspace, but it's not like a big airport, and it doesn't extend out to where it would cause you a problem with your drone. I just wouldn't send your drone up 2,000 feet in the air.
Okay. Well, so I have to look into this. I might have a new avocation this summer and this fall, and maybe I can use my drone to fly all the birds out of my barn and scare them away. I know I'm going to get letters about that. I'm going to get emails about that. But tell you what, I got some little starlings that I think that they just start making noise. It's not, you talk about, oh, the birds are chirping. And so, no, these birds don't chirp nicely. And it's just constant. And, I can get a drone and fly them out, or, maybe get a pellet gun and take care of them that way. So
generally speaking, the airspaces are complicated, and there's a reason. And I think that's part of what this talks about. There's a reason that you need to be trained, right? If you're going to do more than just chase starlings around your barn at your property, because you could be a hazard to people that are flying. You could harm others, so I think it is the drone thing is wonderful in a lot of respects. There's also going to need to be probably a crackdown on quote unquote recreational use, because there's also plenty of people who are definitely operating commercially, who are not licensed. Now, by the way, if the FAA finds out about that, you can be in pretty serious trouble. So it is worth noting that that's really a bad idea.
So right now we're in the tinkering stages of, the Wright brothers with drones and things like that. But if we really are serious, and I am, I think this is, I'm catching on to this idea that where this could really be helpful to us as a society on a lot of different levels. But as we enter this new phase of drone usage, we are going to have some regulations.
And the FAA, by the way, not always is the government out in front, but they've been working on this for a few years now. And they are getting close to feeling like they're going to have systems in place, especially for commercial operators, to make this type of stuff safe. Because that is the reason the FAA exists, is pretty much for that purpose, is to keep us everyday people safe, while allowing air traffic to navigate the skies. So there's a lot of potential good the government has to keep up in terms of making sure that we stay safe, and that we stay safe whether we're on the ground or up in the air, right? Because if we're in a plane, we want to stay safe as well. So let's talk about that. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. According to the New York Times, there's a new aircraft being built in Vermont that has no need for jet fuel. It can take off and land without a runway. Amazon and the Air Force are both betting on it. So, who will be in the cockpit? This is it's a pretty lengthy story, so I would recommend it's linked at thestateofus.org. That if you have time, you read it, because we're not really going to get to go into some of the neat assemblage of different people that are involved in this, and sort of the cultural element of why there's a startup in Vermont and how that's kind of strange, that you'd expect to find this in California somewhere or something like that. But there's a neat story there that if you're interested and want to read that, definitely would recommend. But we don't have time really to.
When
to
you
talk
got
about
my
that
attention,
part of
there
it.
are two entities that are very interested in this startup: Amazon and the U.S. Air Force. I mean, that should be all you need to know right there to pique your interest in. Because if Amazon's interested in something, that means it's probably something very worthwhile and something that will most likely be successful, as well as the Air Force, because they're always looking for an advantage, right, to protect us and to serve us. So I think that said volumes to me as I began to read the article. And it is very interesting with what the concept, and the big thing that stood out to me was when I was reading, 3 to 4% of emissions out into the ozone come from commercial plane use. And so if something like this could alleviate some of that, again, it's another way to make the air cleaner, that, the air we breathe cleaner, and to take care of the planet. What's wrong with that?
There's a lot of benefits to it. One of them in particular is if this can be figured out, not just obviously the climate component, but also rural America, I think is a big one. And the article does talk about that a little bit. It can sometimes be challenging, especially geographically, to get things from point A to point B, because either roads don't travel the right direction or they take you long out of the way. There was actually a good illustrated article about like with drones and deliveries in particular, right? How, say you're a community that's based around a big lake.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking the same thing. Yep.
And we actually have one of those here nearby. Just some, simple things like getting from one side to the other. The only way is to go around, generally speaking.
But you want to order a pizza or whatever, and it takes the delivery person 45 minutes, to get to the opposite side of the lake. If you had a drone or some kind of air product that could fly directly over the lake, you could get it in, a Domino's 30 minutes or less.
One of the biggest reasons that air travel is faster than, cars, generally speaking, is because of that direct line, right? Roads, despite what we think, are rarely point A to point B, the most direct line available. That's almost never the case. And so, but when you get up in the air, right, when I'm up in the plane, I put into the GPS where I want to go, and it draws me a straight line from here to there. And I fly over the obstacles and the roads. And the longer the distance you go, the bigger effect is felt from that, right? In other words, Lance and I going from here to our houses, which are both, very close by. Yeah, I mean, you would save some if you could go straight up and over, but we're talking, you're going to get there in 2 or 3 minutes instead of, 7 or 8 minutes. So is the cost really worth it? Well, but when you go 100 miles, right? And that's kind of what they're talking about here, because the range is going to be limited. Because one of the biggest obstacles to electric powered airplanes is the weight. Proportionally speaking, jet fuel carries infinitely more energy not infinitely, but a giant amount, a far larger amount of energy per its weight than our current batteries do. So a lot of these are probably going to be limited to 250 nautical miles.
The draw is you need so much battery space, and the batteries are so heavy, it makes it difficult to go very far.
Because with cars, right?
But it's kind of like cars, though, right? Because most cars the batteries have a 250 to 300 mile range. So it's very similar, right? But it's not because of the aerodynamics of the airplane or the helicopter that is being built, but it's our limitations by the battery. So if we learn how, and I guess, and I'm going to equate this to the old beta machines or VCRs, that we lugged around, and I had a big shoulder, when my kids were born, I had a big shoulder camera, right? That I took VHS film on, and I had this big tape and then I would plug into a machine. And here we are, 30 years later, and you can do this with this little phone. Is that similar to the problem that if we can solve the battery issue to get more power in a smaller battery? Because my wife's phone will now do as good a job as that VHS camera that I used to carry around. And it's so much simpler now, I don't have to lug it on your shoulder. You just pick it up and with your thumb, and you can get audio and video of your children doing things, and then just punch it in and send it to grandma instead of keeping it on a tape and then taking the tape next time to grandma and say, hey, look what they did 2 weeks ago. We filmed all this for you to see. I mean, is that a fair comparison of we just need some kind of jump like that in battery size and production and power?
Yeah, I mean, I think that and I think what the article tells us is it's two things, right? I mean, batteries themselves will continue to become smaller, right? Will fit more energy in less space, which helps. And batteries will probably also become lighter. Batteries are just inherently heavy because when you think about what makes them up, they're rare earth elements, they're different types of metals, and that just, there is weight to those things, there's a good bit of weight. So looking at how do we make them lighter? Well, you make them lighter by reducing their size, right? And you can also make them lighter by changing the composition of the battery, what goes into it. So that stuff is being researched, not just obviously for planes, but also for cars and all that kind of stuff. For cars, it's always been a lot less of a factor because the weight isn't nearly as relevant, if that makes sense. Your vehicle's sitting on the ground. So yes, I mean, how heavy it is does impact, obviously, your total range, but not nearly to the extent when you suspend something above the ground, right? Because the ground is bearing part of that force and weight. And yes, you still have to propel that forward, but you're only propelling it forward. In a plane, you're operating in another dimension, right? You have to not only propel forward, you also have to provide lift to keep it off the ground. So there's a lot more force required in a plane than in a car with a battery, which is part of what makes the planes a bigger obstacle than cars have been, because you have to provide the necessary lift, and lift is totally impacted by weight, right? How much lift do you need?
So is that why I don't have my Jetson car?
Yes. That is.
See, that's where you don't understand
a big
sometimes.
Part of the reason.
He's not going to be, Lance ain't going to be for this, because no, man, I grew up on the Jetsons. I've been waiting my whole life for a Jetson car. And what you're telling me now is the closest I'm going to get is a drone.
I think the drones are going to definitely come sooner.
For me.
Yes.
For me, most likely, my dream, my fantasy, my avocation to drive a Jetson car is going to have to be fulfilled through flying a drone.
Probably. Because drones are what? They're small. They're not going long distances.
Right. I mean, you said 45, 50-pound drone, right?
Right. And they're carrying lightweight material,
right?
I mean, they're bringing you an iPhone, they're bringing you a coffee,
4-pound package. So like a 45-pound drone,
maybe a book
carries a 4-pound or less package.
Right,
I think
a small book.
Reading in the article.
Yeah. So I mean, that's the other thing to keep in mind here is the reason drones are coming faster and they're electric powered is because they're carrying lightweight things over short distances, which is where that really excels. And that's, by the way, that's true of electric vehicles too. They're actually more efficient in cities and at slower speeds than they are at higher speeds. And that's kind of a good way to think about this as well. The further you go, the harder it becomes to make the current battery technology make sense. But at 250 miles or less, which is a very common route between shipping areas, that can be very efficient and can probably be very cost affordable to transport goods via air, directly, rather than having to load them up on trucks.
We've talked about this before. We mentioned it briefly, but just for people who maybe didn't hear that episode, this is being done in Australia and in Africa, in places where, I think it was Ghana, maybe, that I remember reading about, countries where roads or where people live a long way away from a hospital, they're flying medicines on a daily basis. And there was one company that we read about, it did 100, it took them 6 years to get 100,000 flights. And then they got their second 100,000 flights with their drone in a 12-month period, in 1 year. So it's not like we're talking about it as it's new, and it is new, but there have been companies that are now coming to the United States that have been working on these things for years and having success in rural areas. To your point, in rural areas.
Well, I mean, the article actually notes that a battery-powered aircraft with no internal combustion has been a goal of engineers ever since the Wright brothers. I think we fail to remember, too, we talked about this with cars. Electric cars aren't new either. At the dawn of the automobile, we're talking way back here, folks, right?
Back in the 1880s and 90s.
There was a back and forth between, was it going to be the internal combustion engine or the battery? And the reason was mainly because gas was cheaper and more available than the elements needed, and the batteries were more complex. It was actually easier. Now we're seeing it sort of go the other way. But the point is that this idea, right? Batteries are not a new technology. They've been around a long time in a lot of different forms. That's not new. And to Lance's point, drones have been in development for several decades now in different respects. So it's really just about the technology's improving, and we're figuring out better use cases for it. And that other component that we talked about a lot, the government is catching up on making sure that there are the right policies in place to keep us, the consumers, happy and safe, while also enabling the all of the many benefits that come with this type of both transport for people, but transport. And that's kind of the thing that I think is the takeaway here, Lance, is all of what we talked about today is not for people, right? It is all focused on moving goods from point A to point B. People's a whole other ballgame. One that I'm sure we'll get to continue to talk about, but this is all focused on get me my stuff from A to B.
Exactly. And we've talked about all the different ways that it could help society besides just a faster delivery.
So, Lance, this isn't just an avocation for us, is it? We have a mission here at True Chat, and we're working on trying to pursue a goal.
We do. And our mission is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And if you want to talk to us, we haven't pushed this in a while, but we'd like to hear from you. So if you have a comment on today's show or a show you've listened to at another time, email us at podcast@thestateofus.org. Tell your friends and family. And if they want to know how they can listen to this show and not have to wait to hear you tell them about it, tell them they can find us as a podcast on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and everywhere podcasts are found.
The State of Us is available Tuesdays and Thursdays, first thing in the morning as a podcast. We're heard on the weekends on AM and FM radio stations across the United States. I think Lance takes the victory today. And
whoop, whoop.
And on that note,
it's always fun to win.
For the State of Us, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to Bradley Bush, our producer, and thank you, our audience, for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.